Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to dive into the mystery of the Zodiac Killer. You've provided a ton of articles and background info.
It looks like we have quite a puzzle to unravel.
Yeah, exactly. So our mission today is to sift through all this, find the most important pieces, and see if we can make some sense of it all. Where do you think we should start?
Well, to understand the puzzle, we need to understand the pieces. So let's start with the bedrock of this case, the 5 confirmed Zodiac murders. It's fascinating to see how these initial crimes really set the stage for everything that followed.
Makes sense. Okay, so first up we have the Lake Herman Road murders. December 20th, 1968. High school sweethearts David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. They were parked at a lover's lane,
Such a classic scene.
but with a dark turn.
It really is. What's striking about this first attack is the chilling efficiency. The Zodiac pulled up just feet away from their car and fired several shots, seemingly to force them out. It's like he was orchestrating the scene.
Like he was directing a play.
Almost, yeah. A very disturbing play.
And tragically, David was killed trying to escape, and Betty Lou was chased and shot 5 times in the back. It really sets the tone for the brutality we see throughout this case.
It does, and importantly, it establishes this pattern of calculated cruelty. The Zodiac wasn't just randomly shooting, there was a deliberate method to his madness.
Okay, so then we jump ahead to July 4th, 1969, Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. Michael McGough and Darlene Farron are attacked just before midnight. Another couple, another lover's lane. It's almost like the Zodiac is deliberately targeting these symbols of young love.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? And the similarities to the Lake Herman Road attack are striking. Again, the Zodiac approaches the car, shines a flashlight, starts firing. Darlene is killed, but Michael miraculously survives.
And here's where things take a turn. Minutes after the shooting, the Zodiac calls the Vallejo Police Department himself. He actually reports his own crime.
A bold move.
Incredibly arrogant.
And in the call, he even references the previous year's murders, saying, I also killed those kids last year.
It's like he wants to be caught, but at the same time, he's clearly reveling in the terror he's creating. And what's even crazier is that a reporter found the phone he used still off the hook. Talk about a missed opportunity.
You would think that would have been a major break in the case.
Right.
But it seems the Zodiac was careful not to leave any usable fingerprints.
Okay, so next we have September 27th, 1969, Lake Berryessa. This time, the Zodiac ditches the gun and attacks Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard with a knife. It's a brutal attack, and even more disturbing, he's wearing his now infamous costume, a black executioner's hood and a bib with the Zodiac symbol.
This costume adds a whole new layer of psychological terror to the scene. He's no longer just a shadowy figure, he's a symbol, a specter of death.
And he's not just attacking them physically, he's playing mind games. He claims to be an escaped convict, even giving specific details about his supposed escape.
It's a classic manipulative tactic. He's trying to control the narrative, to create an image of himself that's both terrifying and elusive.
Sadly, Cecilia died from her injuries, but Brian survived and was able to provide valuable details to the police. And just like at Blue Rock Springs, the Zodiac calls the Napa County Sheriff's Department shortly after the attack, again reporting his own crime. He leaves no fingerprints, but a reporter finds the phone minutes later still off the hook. It's uncanny how he manages to pull this off repeatedly.
It's a pattern that's both fascinating and frustrating. He seems to be deliberately taunting the police, flaunting his ability to outsmart them at every turn.
Okay, then we come to October 11th, 1969. The final confirmed Zodiac murder, the killing of Paul Stein, a San Francisco cab driver. This time he shoots Stein in the head, takes his wallet and keys, and seemingly vanishes into the city.
What makes this case particularly tragic is that 3 teenagers actually witnessed the crime and called the police. They even provided a description of the Zodiac, but a miscommunication with the dispatcher, who mistakenly broadcast the suspect as a black male, allowed the Zodiac to slip away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's a devastating error that may have cost investigators their best chance at catching him.
Absolutely. And the fact that the Zodiac was so brazen, committing this murder in a busy city, suggests this growing confidence, a sense of invincibility.
It's like he's pushing the boundaries, testing the limits of what he can get away with.
Exactly. And as we delve into the suspected cases, you'll see that this pattern of escalation, of pushing the boundaries, becomes even more apparent.
Okay, so we've laid out the foundation of this case. The 5 confirmed murders. 5 brutal attacks that terrorized Northern California and left this indelible mark on the public psyche. But the story doesn't end there. You've also provided information about this whole web of suspected victims, cases that could potentially connect to the Zodiac, further expanding the scope of his reign of terror.
And that's where things get really interesting. The confirmed murders give us a glimpse into the Zodiac's modus operandi, his preferred methods, his chilling signature. But the suspected cases, they offer this tantalizing glimpse into a possible evolution of his motives, his methods, his madness.
Let's dive into those suspected cases. One of the earliest possible connections to the Zodiac is the murder of Raymond Davis, a cab driver in Oceanside, California, back in 1962. This predates the confirmed Zodiac killings by several years, but there are some eerie similarities.
Absolutely. The most striking parallel is the chilling phone call made the day before the murder. Someone called the police claiming responsibility and stated, "You'll never be able to figure it out." Then, after the murder, another call taunted the police, saying, "Do you remember me calling you last week? I killed the cab driver, and I am going to get me a bus driver next."
That sends shivers down my spine just hearing you say that. It's so reminiscent of the Zodiac's later taunts. And the fact that Davis was shot with a .22 caliber pistol aligns with some of the confirmed Zodiac crimes. Could this be an early sign of the Zodiac's emergence, a taste of the darkness to come?
It's certainly a possibility, and it raises an important question. If the Zodiac was active as early as 1962, how many other crimes might he be responsible for that we haven't even considered?
It's a terrifying thought. The scope of this case could be much larger than anyone imagined.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder if we're looking at the complete picture or just a fragment of a much larger and darker puzzle.
Okay, so let's move on to June 4th, 1963. We have the brutal murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Faye Edwards, a young couple shot to death on a beach in Gaviota State Park. Again, we see echoes of the confirmed Zodiac crimes.
The similarities are undeniable. Like the victims at Lake Berryessa, Robert and Linda, were bound with pre-cut rope. And the murder weapon, a .22 caliber firearm, matches the one used in the Lake Herman Road killings. It's like a twisted echo of the Zodiac's signature.
And the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department even went so far as to claim that they believed the Zodiac was responsible. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is, and it speaks to the difficulty of separating fact from speculation in this case. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence that points towards the Zodiac, but nothing concrete enough to definitively link him to these early crimes.
Right, so it's like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces.
Mm-hmm.
We can see the general shape, but there are gaps in the image.
Details that remain elusive.
Exactly.
And it makes the case all the more intriguing. We're forced to rely on inference, on connecting the dots, to try and make sense of it all.
Okay. So next we have the tragic case of Johnny Ray and Joyce Ann Swindle. They were newlyweds from Alabama, found shot to death on a beach in Ocean Beach, California in February of 1964.
It's just heartbreaking.
It really is. And the brutality of the attack, the shooting from a distance and then approaching to shoot again at close range, is chillingly reminiscent of the Domingos and Edwards murders. And again, we see the recurring theme of an attack near water.
It's like a signature element, a macabre preference. Could this indicate a deeper connection between these crimes? A pattern that points to the Zodiac?
It's a compelling theory, and it raises the question, was the Zodiac drawn to these locations for a specific reason? Was there something about bodies of water that held a particular significance for him?
It's a chilling thought, and it adds another layer of complexity to an already convoluted case.
It really does.
It really does add another layer to the mystery. Now, speaking of pattern and potential connections, you've also included information about Sherry Jo Beats. Her murder in Riverside, California back in 1966 has been the subject of intense debate for years. Some believe it's a Zodiac case, while others strongly disagree.
Right. This one feels like a real head-scratcher. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence, but also some significant differences from the confirmed Zodiac crimes. Where do you think we should even begin unpacking this one?
Let's start with the evidence that initially fueled the Zodiac connection. There's this macabre poem carved into a desk at Riverside City College where Sherry Jo was a student. The language and handwriting bear a striking resemblance to some of the Zodiac's later communications.
Almost like a pre-Zodiac calling card.
Yeah, like a pre-Zodiac calling card.
Yeah.
And then there's that handwritten letter the Riverside Police Department received months after the murder. Some believe it was written by the Zodiac, and it even contains details about the crime that weren't publicly known.
And then, to further complicate things, in 1971, the Zodiac sends a letter to the Los Angeles Times claiming credit for Riverside activity.
Exactly. At first glance, it seems like a slam dunk. But there are some puzzling inconsistencies with this theory.
Like what? What doesn't quite add up?
Well, the most glaring difference is the modus operandi. Cherry Joe was brutally stabbed to death, not shot. This
Hmm.
is a significant departure from the Zodiac's usual methods in the confirmed cases.
That's true. And the tone of the letters associated with the Bates case feels subtly different from the Zodiac's later, more confident and boastful communications.
Right. It's almost as if we're dealing with a different personality, a
Yeah.
less developed version of the Zodiac, or perhaps even a copycat trying to capitalize on the notoriety.
So where does that leave us with the Bates case? Is there any way to reconcile these conflicting pieces of the puzzle?
Well, some investigators believe that the Zodiac may have been involved in the Bates case early in his criminal career before he fully developed his signature style.
Okay.
Others believe he was simply claiming credit for a crime he didn't commit, further fueling his notoriety and playing mind games with the public.
It's a fascinating dilemma, and it really highlights the challenge of attributing these earlier, less defined crimes to the Zodiac. We're constantly searching for those telltale signs, those unique elements that scream Zodiac, but sometimes the picture remains blurry.
Exactly. We're forced to navigate this landscape of ambiguity, weighing the probabilities and searching for the most plausible explanation.
Speaking of ambiguous cases, you've also included information about the murders of John Frank LaHood and Sandra Garcia.
Hmm.
They were found stabbed to death on a beach in Santa Barbara in 1970.
Again, we see that chilling proximity to water. And the brutality of the attack, particularly the numerous stab wounds to John's face, is particularly disturbing. It certainly aligns with the Zodiac's capacity for violence, but again, we're lacking that definitive link, that smoking gun.
It's a pattern that repeats itself as we delve deeper into these suspected cases, tantalizing similarities, but no irrefutable proof.
Right. And it makes the task of separating genuine Zodiac crimes from unrelated acts of violence incredibly difficult.
Okay, next we have a case that hits close to home for law enforcement. The murder of San Francisco police officer Richard Radetich in 1970. He was shot and killed while writing a parking ticket.
A seemingly random act of violence.
Yeah, that shocked the city.
And what makes this case particularly intriguing is that the Zodiac actually alluded to killing a cop in one of his letters.
Oh, wow.
It was this boastful claim that sent chills down the spines of law enforcement.
But the San Francisco Police Department has always denied any connection between the Zodiac and Radetich's murder. And the weapon used, a .38, doesn't match the Zodiac's preferred .22.
It's another case that falls into that gray area of speculation. Was the Zodiac genuinely involved, or was he simply claiming credit for a crime that fit his narrative of power and terror?
It's impossible to say for sure, but it does raise an interesting question. If the Zodiac was intentionally claiming credit for crimes he didn't commit, what does that tell us about his psychological profile? Was it a way to inflate his ego, to create this larger-than-life persona?
It's certainly possible, and it speaks to his deep-seated need for attention, for recognition, for notoriety. He wasn't content with simply committing these crimes. He wanted to be known for them, to be feared, to be remembered.
It's a truly disturbing thought.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about a case that's shrouded in both mystery and sorrow. The disappearance of Donna Lass in 1970. She was a nurse working in South Lake Tahoe, and she vanished without a trace.
This one is especially haunting because for years it was unclear if foul play was even involved.
Right.
But there are some elements that point towards a possible Zodiac connection.
Right. The most compelling piece of evidence is this postcard sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in 1971.
Cope.
It features a collage of advertisements, and one of those ads promotes a condominium development near where Donna disappeared.
It's a very specific detail.
Yeah, very specific detail that piqued the interest of investigators.
And then there's that creepy Christmas card sent to Donna's sister in 1974.
Right.
It includes a phrase about the guardian of the pines, which some believe is a reference to the forested area where Donna was last seen.
Yeah. Those two pieces of communication, combined with the timing of Donna's disappearance, have led some to believe that the Zodiac might be responsible.
Sadly, just last year, in 2023, a skull was found in the Sierra Nevada and identified as belonging to Donna.
Oh, wow.
It brought this tragic closure to her family, but also reignited the debate about her disappearance and the possibility of a Zodiac connection.
It's a heartbreaking case that underscores the human cost of this mystery. These aren't just abstract puzzles to solve. They're real lives cut short, families left with unanswered questions, and this lingering sense of loss.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that even though we're approaching this case from an analytical perspective, we can't lose sight of the very real pain and suffering that the Zodiac inflicted on so many people.
Well said. Now let's shift our attention to another case involving a disappearance. 14-year-old Sandy Betts, who vanished without a trace in Petaluma, California in 1972. While there's no direct evidence linking her case to the Zodiac, a letter sent to her parents years later has fueled a lot of speculation.
Yes, this letter is particularly chilling. It was received in 1974, addressed to Sandy's parents, and signed simply, "A friend." The handwriting and tone of the letter have led some to believe that it could have been written by the Zodiac.
And the content of the letter is what makes it truly disturbing. It claims that Sandy is alive and well, but that she doesn't want to come home because she's found a new life.
Wow.
It's this cruel manipulation of a family's grief, preying on their deepest fears and hopes.
Whether or not this letter was genuinely written by the Zodiac is unknown, but it adds another layer of unease to an already tragic case.
It does, and it raises an important point. Even in cases where his direct involvement is uncertain, the Zodiac's shadow looms large. He cast this pall over an entire region, creating an atmosphere of fear and suspicion that lingered for years.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, examining a web of potential Zodiac victims, each case offering its own unique set of clues and challenges. What strikes me is the recurring theme of water. So many of these cases, both the confirmed and suspected ones, occur near lakes, beaches, or other bodies of water. Is there any significance to this pattern, do you think?
It's an intriguing observation and one that investigators have certainly considered. Some believe it could point to a psychological connection, a fascination or obsession that the Zodiac had with water.
All right.
Others suggest it might be more practical, perhaps related to his methods or his desire to dispose of bodies.
It's fascinating to consider the possibilities. Was water a symbol for him, a source of power or inspiration? Or was it simply a convenient element in his crimes?
Exactly. It's another one of those tantalizing questions that adds to the mystique of the Zodiac case.
Now, speaking of mysteries, you've also included information about two series of murders that some researchers believe could be connected to the Zodiac, even though he never directly claimed responsibility for them. Let's start with the astrological murders. What are those all about?
These were a string of potentially connected homicides that occurred in Northern California between the late 1960s and early 1970s.
Okay.
The victims were all female, and they were killed in various ways: strangulation, drowning, throat cutting, and then dumped in ravines.
Wow.
What links them and what gives them their name is the timing of the murders. They seem to coincide with specific astrological events like solstices, equinoxes, even Friday the 13th.
Whoa, that's chilling. So, are investigators suggesting that the Zodiac, a guy who is clearly obsessed with astrology, could have been behind these killings too?
That's the theory some have put forward. It's certainly a compelling idea, given the Zodiac's known interest in astrology and his tendency to incorporate it into his crimes. But it's important to remember that there's no hard evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints, no communication from the Zodiac directly linking him to these astrological murders.
So it's another one of those cases where we're left to ponder the possibilities, to weigh the circumstantial evidence, and consider whether or not it fits within the broader narrative of the Zodiac's crimes.
Exactly. And it raises a fascinating question. If the Zodiac was evolving, becoming more sophisticated in his methods, could he have intentionally shifted his modus operandi to avoid detection? Could these astrological murders, with their lack of a clear signature, be a sign of his growing confidence and his desire to remain elusive?
It's a chilling thought, and it makes you wonder how far his web of terror truly extended.
Indeed. Now let's move on to the other series of murders that has been linked to the Zodiac. The Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders. These were a series of killings that targeted young women hitchhiking in Sonoma County and Santa Rosa between 1972 and 1973.
I remember reading about these. At least 7 women fell victim to this killer, and the brutality of the crimes was just truly horrific. But what's the connection to the Zodiac? I don't recall him ever claiming responsibility for these murders.
That's right, he didn't. But there are a few intriguing details that have led some investigators to believe that he might be involved. First, there's the timing. These murders occurred after the confirmed Zodiac killings had seemingly stopped, suggesting a possible continuation of his criminal activity.
And remember how in one of his letters, the Zodiac had mentioned that he planned to change his modus operandi to make his murders look like routine robberies, killings of anger, and a few fake accidents.
Exactly. And some researchers believe that the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, which shared some of those elements, could have been his way of blending in, of throwing investigators off his trail.
It's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder if there are other undiscovered crimes out there that fit this pattern. Crimes that have been mistakenly attributed to other perpetrators or simply dismissed as unrelated incidents.
Now, adding another layer of intrigue to this possible connection, Arthur Lee Allen, one of the prime Zodiac suspects, lived in Santa Rosa during the time of these murders.
Interesting.
He even owned a mobile home there.
So is there any hard evidence connecting Allen to these hitchhiker murders?
Unfortunately, no. There's no DNA, no fingerprints, no eyewitness accounts placing him at any of the crime scenes.
It seems like we keep running into this wall of circumstantial evidence.
Right.
So much that points towards possible connections, but never that definitive proof that definitively links the Zodiac to these other crimes.
It's the ultimate frustration of this case. We're left with a puzzle that seems almost complete, but with a few crucial pieces missing.
Right.
Those pieces that could finally reveal the full picture.
Okay, so we've explored the known and suspected murders and even delved into these two series of killings that could potentially be connected to the Zodiac. But the big question remains, who was the Zodiac killer? You've provided information about several potential suspects. Let's dive into those and see if we can shed some light on this enduring mystery.
Absolutely. Over the decades, countless theories have been put forward and thousands of people have been investigated. But the Zodiac's true identity remains one of the most enduring mysteries in criminal history.
Right. But there are a few suspects who stand out, either because of the weight of evidence against them or because they've captured the public's imagination. Let's start with the only suspect ever officially named by police, Arthur Lee Allen.
Arthur Lee Allen. The name is practically synonymous with the Zodiac case. He was a former elementary school teacher and convicted sex offender who was investigated thoroughly for years.
So what made him such a strong suspect? What led the police to focus on him so intently?
Well, there is a lot of circumstantial evidence that seemed to point to him. Physically, he resembled some of the witness descriptions of the Zodiac. He owned a Zodiac brand watch.
Right.
Remember that distinct symbol? He also lived near some of the crime scenes.
And he even admitted to a friend that he had fantasized about killing people and signing his name Zodiac.
Right. And handwriting analysis suggested some similarities between his writing and the Zodiac's letters.
It seemed like a very strong case was building against him.
Exactly, but here's the thing, and this is the biggest problem with Allen as a suspect. None of the physical evidence ever matched.
What do you mean? What kind of physical evidence are we talking about?
His fingerprints didn't match those collected from the crime scenes, and DNA testing, which wasn't available in the 60s and 70s, also failed to link him to any of the Zodiac's letters or evidence.
So, close, but no cigar. It's like they had all the circumstantial pieces of the puzzle, but the key piece, the one that would lock it all together, was missing.
Precisely. It's a classic case of compelling circumstantial evidence that ultimately falls apart under scrutiny. And to add another layer of intrigue, shortly before Allen died in 1992, he was interviewed for a documentary called This is the Zodiac Speaking.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating. What happened in that interview? Did he confess?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. The filmmakers claim that Allen actually admitted to being the Zodiac off camera, but then refused to repeat the admission on film.
Wow, that's incredible. So does that mean he did it? Or was he just messing with the filmmakers, playing mind games even from beyond the grave?
It's hard to say for sure. The film's claims are controversial, and without a recorded confession or any corroborating evidence, it's impossible to know for certain what Allen truly admitted to.
It's yet another layer of mystery in a case that seems to be overflowing with them.
Now let's talk about another suspect who has garnered a lot of attention in recent years, Gary Francis Post. His name was put forward by an independent investigative group called the Case Breakers back in 2021.
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing about that. They claimed to have cracked the case, right? What was their evidence?
They pointed to photos of Post that show scars on his forehead, which they believed matched witness descriptions of the Zodiac. They also claimed that anagrams hidden messages in the Zodiac's letters spelled out Post's name.
Anagrams. That's a pretty bold claim.
Yeah.
And it seems like a bit of a stretch to me.
It does, doesn't it? And while the case breakers were convinced they had solved the case, both the FBI and local law enforcement expressed skepticism about their claims.
Right, I remember reading that the FBI stated that the case remained open and that it had no new information to share. So while Post is a suspect of interest, his connection to the crimes is still very much in question.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of approaching these new theories with a healthy dose of skepticism. While it's tempting to believe that every new lead is the one that will finally crack the case, the reality is that many of them turn out to be dead ends.
Okay, so we've covered the two big names, Allen and Post. Were there any other suspects in your stack of information that are worth mentioning?
Yes, there are a few others who have garnered attention over the years. One is Giuseppe Bevilacqua, a retired army sergeant.
Okay, what's the story there? What made him a suspect?
An Italian journalist named Francesco Amicone conducted an investigation linking Bevilacqua to both the Zodiac killings and a series of murders in Italy known as the Monster of Florence case.
Wow, international intrigue.
It's a fascinating international twist to the story.
So did they have any solid evidence?
Amicone claimed that Bevilacqua had confessed to him during a phone call, but the conversation was never recorded.
Oh.
And unfortunately, Bevilacqua died in 2022, taking any secrets he might have held to the grave.
Another tantalizing lead that ultimately leads to a dead end. It's almost like the Zodiac case is cursed.
There does seem to be an element of that, doesn't there?
Okay, who else is on our list of potential suspects?
Then there's Paul Dewar. He was a North Bay resident who was named as a suspect in a 2022 book by author Jarrett Kobek.
Okay. What made him a suspect? What evidence did Kobek uncover?
Kobek's research suggested that Dewar was an avid letter writer, and some of his writings contain eerie similarities to the Zodiac's style and themes. Dewar's daughter has even spoken about her father's sometimes violent behavior, which adds another layer of intrigue to the theory.
Interesting. So did the police investigate this new lead? Did Kobek share his findings with them?
According to Kobek, he sent a detailed document outlining his findings to the SFPD, but never received a response. So it seems like this lead, like so many others, may have fallen through the cracks.
Okay, any more suspects in our stack of research?
Yes, one more. Richard Gaikowski.
Okay, tell me more about him. What made him a potential Zodiac suspect?
Gaikowski was a reporter who worked for a couple of local newspapers during the time of the Zodiac killings.
So did he have any personal connection to the victims? Or was it something about his writing that caught the attention of investigators?
There's no known personal connection to any of the victims. But Zodiac researcher Tom Voigt, who believes Gaikowski is the most likely suspect, has uncovered a number of compelling connections.
Like what? What makes Voight so convinced that Gaikowski is the Zodiac?
Well, for starters, Gaikowski's appearance resembled the composite sketch of the Zodiac created after the murder of Paul Stein. He also lived and worked very close to two of the Zodiac's crime scenes. And here's a really interesting detail. The nickname Gaik appears in one of the Zodiac ciphers that supposedly contained his identity.
No way. That's pretty compelling. So what happened with the investigation? Did the police ever seriously consider Gaikowski as a suspect?
Despite the circumstantial evidence, the police seemed to dismiss Gaikowski early on, and DNA evidence hasn't been compared.
It's frustrating how many of these leads seem to hit dead ends. It's like we're constantly getting so close to solving the puzzle, but then we have a wall, a missing piece, a lack of follow-through.
It's the nature of cold cases, especially one as complex and high-profile as the Zodiac. There's always a risk of information overload.
Of leads getting lost in the shuffle.
Yeah.
Of tunnel vision focusing on one suspect while others slip through the cracks.
Okay. So we've discussed some of the most prominent suspects, but the question remains, will we ever know for sure who the Zodiac Killer was? You've also included some information about developments in the case, especially in recent years. Have there been any breakthroughs that offer hope for a resolution?
Well, the SFPD officially marked the case inactive in 2004. But thankfully, they reopened it a few years later, and there have been several attempts to extract DNA from the Zodiac's letters, hoping to use modern technology to finally identify him.
I remember reading about that. It's similar to how they caught the Golden State Killer, right?
Exactly. But unfortunately, extracting usable DNA from those old letters has proven to be a challenge.
That's disappointing.
It is. And remember that 1990 Christmas card we talked about earlier? The one that was rediscovered in the San Francisco Chronicles archives?
The one that was potentially sent by the Zodiac? Yeah. Well, that discovery generated a lot of buzz, but ultimately, the handwriting was deemed inauthentic by experts.
So close.
I know. And let's not forget the allegations made in the 2024 documentary. This is the Zodiac speaking.
Oh, right. That documentary made some pretty explosive claims. Refresh my memory on that. What were the key takeaways?
The filmmakers interviewed a family who had been close friends with Arthur Lee Allen.
Right.
They made some startling claims about Allen's behavior during the time of the Zodiac killings. They even alleged that Allen had confessed to being the Zodiac before he died.
Wow. Case closed.
Not quite. Their claims, while shocking, haven't been independently corroborated.
It's amazing, though, how this case continues to generate new leads and theories, even after all these years. What do you think keeps people so fascinated by the Zodiac Killer?
I think it's a combination of factors. There's the inherent mystery of an unsolved case, the puzzle that begs to be solved. There's the chilling nature of the crimes themselves, the brutality and randomness that tap into our primal fears.
Okay.
And there's the cultural impact. The way the Zodiac has permeated our collective consciousness, becoming a symbol of evil and the unknown.
It's a potent mix. And the fact that he was never caught, that he seemingly vanished into thin air, only adds to the fascination.
Absolutely. It allows our imaginations to run wild, to fill in the gaps with our own theories and interpretations. And in a way, that makes the Zodiac even more terrifying. He becomes this blank slate onto which we can project our own fears and anxieties.
It's a fascinating psychological phenomenon, and it speaks to the enduring power of this case. But beyond the mystery and the fascination, there's also a real human cost. The
Absolutely.
victims, their families, the communities that were terrorized by the Zodiac's actions. We can't forget about them.
You're absolutely right. It's important to remember that at the heart of this mystery are real people whose lives were tragically cut short or forever altered by the Zodiac's crimes.
Okay, so after examining all of these sources, all this information you've provided, what does this deep dive tell us about the Zodiac Killer case?
Well, it's clear that this case remains unsolved, leaving behind a trail of chilling questions and an enduring fascination. We've explored the confirmed murders, the chilling correspondence, the countless suspects, and the tantalizing possibility that the Zodiac's reign of terror extended far beyond those initial 5 victims.
And yet, despite decades of investigation, the killer's identity remains a mystery. It's almost like he vanished into thin air.
It's a frustrating reality for those who seek justice, and it fuels endless speculation and debate. Will new DNA technology finally unmask this killer? Or will the Zodiac forever remain a shadowy enigma?
Those are the big questions that continue to haunt this case. And they're the questions that keep us coming back year after year, searching for answers, hoping for a resolution, trying to make sense of the senseless. It's interesting how the Zodiac, he managed to create such a myth around himself.
He was a master manipulator, wasn't he? Knew how to use the media, how to create a persona that would both captivate and terrify.
I mean, even his name, Zodiac, evokes this sense of mystery and power.
Exactly. He chose a name that would resonate with people, that would create this image of an almost mythical figure.
And his costume. The executioner's hood and that Zodiac symbol. It's like something straight out of a horror movie.
It was all carefully crafted to instill fear, and create a sense of awe.
And it worked. I mean, he became an icon of terror.
He became a legend, even though his true identity remained hidden.
I think that's part of what makes this case so compelling. The fact that he was never caught.
It leaves us with this sense of unfinished business.
And it makes you wonder if he's still out there, watching, waiting.
Even if he's gone, his shadow lingers.
It makes you question everyone, doesn't it?
It does. It makes you realize that evil can lurk anywhere, even in the most unexpected places.
And it makes you wonder about the nature of evil itself. What drives someone to commit such horrific acts?
That's the ultimate question, isn't it? And unfortunately, it's one that we may never be able to answer definitively.
But I think that's okay. Sometimes the most compelling mysteries are the ones that remain unsolved.
They force us to think critically, to question our assumptions, to confront the unknown.
And they remind us that there are still secrets out there waiting to be discovered.
Exactly. That's the beauty of a good mystery. It keeps us engaged, it keeps us searching, it keeps us wondering.
So after all this, after examining all the evidence and exploring all the theories, what's your take on the Zodiac case? Do you think we'll ever know for sure who he was?
It's hard to say. Part of me believes that with advances in DNA technology and investigative techniques, we might one day finally unmask the Zodiac. But another part of me wonders if he'll always remain a shadow, a ghost that haunts our collective imagination.
A ghost in the machine.
Exactly.
Well, one thing's for sure. This case will continue to fascinate people for generations to come.
It's a story that will never die.
And who knows? Maybe one day, someone listening to this deep dive will be the one to finally crack the code.
It's certainly possible.
That's the beauty of a mystery like this. It invites everyone to participate, to become armchair detectives, to search for clues, to try and make sense of the senseless.
And maybe, just maybe, someone out there holds the missing piece of the puzzle.
It's a tantalizing thought.
It is.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the Zodiac Killer case.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for providing all of these fascinating sources and for taking this journey with us.
We hope you enjoyed the ride.
And remember, the mystery continues.